Hey guys, let me show you how to create this dark mode switcher in React using Tailwind and Context API. So before we get started with understanding what Context API is and what it does, let's first understand what problem it solves. So there's a problem in React called prop drilling, which occurs when a prop needs to be passed through several layers of nested components to reach a deeply nested child component that actually needs that prop. So basically consider this scenario, this parent component fetches some data from an API and it has to pass this prop to several intermediary child components, and then there is some deeply nested child component which is actually going to have the need for that data which this component fetched. Okay, so all these components which had the prop passed onto themselves from this parent component, they don't require that prop for themselves, but this has to be done for the deeply nested child component to get access to this prop. Now basically what it does that it can lead to increased complexity, especially in large component trees, and makes managing the flow of props more challenging. Okay, this just clutters your code base, and it makes it even harder to refactor the code later on. So what we can do to tackle this is that we can use the context API. So what is happening here is that we have a parent component which is going to pass on some value, provide some value to all the child components at once. Right here, without context API, we were passing these props manually to each child component. But here we have the parent component just passing this value once to all the child components. Okay, so basically the context API allows us to share data across the component tree without explicitly passing props through each level of the hierarchy. Okay, so now for this case, for our project, we'll be creating a theme context. Okay, we'll be creating a theme context, and this parent component will provide that theme context to the rest of the child components. And all these child components will be using a custom hook that we'll be creating called the useTheme hook to gain access to this theme context. Okay, so let's get started with the code. Uh, so I've already set up a React project, a basic React project using Vite, and I've already cleaned up the code. So there you can see that the index.css and app.css files are empty. There's no assets folder, and the app.jsx file is empty. So now let's install Tailwind CSS for this. So okay, so let's open up the docs for Tailwind CSS. So tailwindcss.com. Get started. So yeah, we are using Vite here, so let's follow that instruction. So npm install tailwind css and then the plugin for Vite. While this is happening, yeah, so just copy paste this code. And okay, yeah, we can't copy paste, so we have to import this plugin for Tailwind CSS in our Vite config file, and we have to mention that plugin in our plugins array. Okay, there we go. And then inside our index.css file, which is the starting point of our CSS styling, we have to import this here. Okay, and we have to mention this file in our index.html file. Okay, we can do that from here. Yeah, copy this, paste that here. It's called index.css. Let's give it some title, dark mode context API. Okay, there we go, that is set up. Okay, so let's try to run this as well. Lowercase dev. There we go. Since there's nothing, obviously we have a blank screen here. Okay, so now let's create this dark mode toggle button. So I'll be doing that here in a components folder, then dark mode button, dark mode button, yeah, dark mode button .jsx. I've already created a component for this, so I'll just copy paste that. Okay, RFC. Okay, I don't need this. Okay, so dark mode button. Let me copy paste the code for this button here. Okay, and so now I have these dummy values here, toggle dark mode, dark mode. Also, let's import the icon library that we'll be using. So here, let's install that as well. npm I lucide react. Okay, so let's create the dummy values for this. So const dark mode called set dark mode. We'll be replacing these values with its actual logic later on. So use state, um, that's going to be false by default. Okay, let's import that here. Okay, it's not importing. So let's import use state from React. Okay, then let's create our toggle function. So const toggle dark mode equals to async function. Okay, so set dark mode to, now this has to be a toggle function, right? So what we can do is that pref then not pref. So it's just going to do set it as the opposite as to whatever it was earlier. Okay, so that's how it is. So this should work, I think. Okay, so not okay. Yeah, we have to import that. Yeah, so import dark mode button from dark mode button, and let's get that here. Dark button. Okay. There we go. Okay, let's also give this a center align. Okay, so for that we can just create a div here and class name equals to flex items center, justify center h screen. This is just going to take up all the height, and it's going to vertically and horizontally align this to our page. Okay, onto our page. This is working. You can just get this entire code for this tutorial in from the link in the description. And okay, so now let's create the logic, and let's create our first context, which is going to be the theme context. So let's create a new folder called context, and inside this let's create a file called theme.js. So it's a good practice to have all your contexts inside a separate context folder, which is inside your source directory. So now let's create our context. Okay, so first, what are we going to do here? So we have to create three different things. We have to create our theme context, then we have to create a provider for this context, and then we have to create a hook for this context, which our child components will use to gain access to the dark mode property and the toggle dark mode property, the toggle dark mode method to toggle between the different dark mode values. Okay, so let's import create context and use context here. Okay, then let's create our theme context here. Export const theme context equals create context, then passing some values. So dark mode, this is going to be true, and toggle dark mode, this is going to be a function. Okay, there we go. Right, now the child components will have access to these two properties. They'll have access to the value dark mode, the property dark mode, and they will be able to check if it's true or false, and they'll be able to toggle between the dark mode, right? So now let's create the provider. So export const theme provider, and we can do that by theme context dot provider. Okay. So now this provider will be used by our parent component to wrap our child components inside this provider only, and this will just provide these values to our child components. Okay. So let's create the hook now. Export default function use theme, that's our custom hook, and inside this we are just returning use context, and we'll be using our theme context. Okay, so that's it. Let's save that. So let's come back to our app.jsx file, which is the parent component in our case. Let's import the theme provider here. Provider, let me spell right. Okay, I can't just spell. What's it called? Yeah, so import theme provider from contexts and inside that theme. Okay, so now our parent component now has access to this provider, but before we actually wrap our child components with this provider, we have to do a few things. So we have to persist this theme. Okay, if we just do this and we do not persist the value in our browser, so on every refresh it is just going to go back to the default value, the default theme that is going to be set. Okay, it's not going to persist the change, it's not going to persist. So like if for example, if a user has selected light theme, then it's going to go to light theme, but if a user has selected dark mode, then it's going to go back to light theme, because in our case it's not persisting this change. Okay, so for that we'll be using local storage. So let's create a let's create a state dark mode, set dark mode, and equals use state. Okay, and now this is going to be conditional. Okay, so const is dark equals local storage dot get item. We'll be creating an item called dark mode later on, which will have two values, true or dark. So this is going to get the item dark mode and return the value of this item. I can just spell right. Yeah, so dark mode and return is dark true. So if this is going to be true, then it's going to return true, and false if false. Okay, now let's create the toggle function. So const toggle dark mode equals to, it doesn't need async. Okay, this, and then set dark mode, same as what we did earlier in the dummy code. Pref, set it to non-pref. Okay, that's it. Then we have to have a use effect block here, because for every time the component renders, the website loads, basically we have to set uh, the dark mode item in the local storage, and we also want to fetch the value of the dark mode. Okay, if that is true, then we have to add a class of dark to our HTML element, and if that is not dark, then we have to remove that element from the class list. Okay, so local storage dot set item dark mode comma dark mode dot toString. Okay, so now let's get the body element. So const body L equals to document dot body. Then if the body element is there, that means if it's rendered, then check if dark mode is there. So if we have access to the dark mode value, then body dot class list dot add the dark class. Okay, and if that is not true, if we don't have if the dark mode is false, then remove the dark class from the body element. and inside this use effect we'll be passing a dependency that is dark mode here. So on every change of the dark mode, it will re-render this whole uh, component and it will rerun this code. Okay, so there we go. Now finally we can wrap our child components with the theme provider. So okay, let me open up this block. Theme provider, then the value is going to be an object containing both dark mode and toggle dark mode. Okay, then inside this we can just paste our child component. Now let's go to our dark mode button component, and inside this let's just remove this dummy code. Okay, since we don't need this anymore, and we also don't need our use state hook here. We need our use theme hook here. So for that, import use theme. We don't need to destructure it since it's the default export. So import use theme from dot slash context slash theme. Okay, there we go. Now from here we have to destructure the theme and toggle dark mode from this hook. Okay, so const dark mode comma toggle dark mode equals use theme. Okay, there we go. We have already passed in these values. So now let's check if this works. We open this. Okay, yeah, so I've already opened the application tab here, and let's see if this local storage thing works. So yeah, you can see that it's saying dark mode is false in when the moon when the sun is highlighted, and if we toggle it then it's saying true dark mode. But as you can see, this is not changing the background, right? So let's add a class of bg white and dark bg black here. Okay, this should work. Okay, but as you can see, it's still not working. Now let's understand why. So since Tailwind version 4 released, dark mode has been a first class feature, which means that by default it's going to pick up on your system preferences and it's going to set the dark mode according to that. So for example, if a user has set to dark mode, then by default it's going to perform the dark mode styling. Okay, so that's why the BG black is applying in both the cases, even if we toggle. So to give the user the chance to manually select between the different modes, what we have to do is that we have to add this one line inside our index.css file, which is this. Okay, there we go, custom variant. So this is just going to enable the dark mode selection manually or on the basis of class, okay, which we want here. So there we go. If we try it again, we just refresh this. There we go, this is working, and local storage is working properly as well. That's how it is. That's how you create a dark mode switcher in React using Tailwind and context API. Thank you.